Danny's preparations were swift and scant, but sufficient for several days. He stripped the bedclothes from Burley's bed, laid them out neatly on the kitchen floor, and then rolled them up around a slab of cured jowl from the smokehouse, a small iron skillet, and a partly emptied bag of cornmeal. He tied the bundle with baling twine, making a sling by which it could hang from his shoulder. From behind the back hall door he took his hunting coat with his flashlight in one pocket and his old, long-barreled .22 pistol in the other. He removed the pistol and laid it on top of the dish cabinet. His pickup truck was waiting in front of the barn, and the confined hounds wailed again at the sound of his footsteps. "Hush," he said, and they hushed. He pitched his bundle onto the seat and unlatched and raised the hood. He had filled the tank with gas by that afternoon, but had not checked the oil and water. By both principle and necessity, he had never owned a new motor vehicle in his life. The present pickup was a third-hand Dodge, which Burley had liked to describe as a loose association of semi-retired parts, like me. But Danny was, in self-defense, a good mechanic, and he and the old truck and the box of tools that he always kept on the floorboard made a working unit that mostly worked. The oil was all right. He poured a little water into the radiator, relatched the hood, set the bucket back on the well top, and got into the truck. He started the engine, backed around in front of the corn crib, turned on the headlights, headed out the lane, and so committed himself to the succession of ever wider and faster roads that led to the seasonless, sunless, and moonless world where Burley lay in his bonds. The old truck roaring in an outlandish disproportion to its speed, he drove through Port William and down the long slant into the river bottoms where the headlights showed the ripening fields of corn. After a while he slowed and turned left onto the interstate, gaining speed again as he went down the ramp. Traffic on the great road was thinner than in the daytime, but constant nevertheless. As he entered the flow of it, he accelerated until the vibrating needle of the speedometer stood at 60 miles an hour, 20 miles faster than he usually drove. If at the crescendo of this acceleration the truck had blown up, it would not altogether have surprised him, nor would it altogether have displeased him. He hated the interstate and the reeking stream of traffic that poured along it day and night, and he liked the old truck only insofar as it was a salvage job and his own. If she blows, he thought, I'll try to stop her crosswise of both lanes. But though she roared and groaned and panted and complained, she did not blow. Danny's mother, Kate Helen Branch, had been the love of Burley Coulter's life. They were careless lovers, those two, and Danny came as a surprise, albeit a far greater surprise to Burley than to Kate Helen. Danny was born to his mother's name, a certified branch of the branches, and he grew up in the care of his mother and his mother's mother in a small tin-roofed, paper-sided house on an abandoned corner of Thad Spellman's farm, not far from town and even closer, by a shortcut up through the woods, to the Coulter place. As the sole child in that womanly household, Danny was more than amply mothered, and he did not go fatherless, for Burley was that household's faithful visitor, its pillar and provider. He took a hand in Danny's upbringing from the start, although, since the boy was nominally a branch, Danny always knew his father as Uncle Burley. If Danny became a more domestic man than his father, that is because he loved the frugal, ample household run by his mother and grandmother, and later by his mother and himself. He loved his mother's ability to pinch and mend and make things last. He was secretly proud of her small stitches in the patches of his clothes. They kept a big garden and a small flock of hens. They kept a pig in a pen to eat scraps and make meat, and they kept a Jersey cow that picked a living in the green months out of Thad Spellman's thickety pasture. The necessary corn for the pig and chickens and the corn and the hay for the cow were provided by Burley, and soon enough by Burley and Danny. If Danny became a better farmer than his father, that is because, through Burley, he came under the influence of Burley's brother, Jarrett, of Jarrett's son, Nathan, and of Burley and Nathan's friend, Matt Feltner, all of whom were farmers by calling and by devotion. From them he learned the ways that people lived by their soil and their care of it, by the bounty of crops and animals, and by the power of horses and mules. But if Danny became more of a man of the woods and the streams than nearly anybody else of his place and time, that was because of Burley himself, For Burley was by calling and by devotion a man of the woods and streams. When duty did not keep him in the fields, he would be hunting or fishing or roaming about in search of herbs or wild fruit, or merely roaming about to see what he could see. And from the time Danny was old enough to want to go along, Burley took him. He taught him to be quiet and watch and not complain, to hunt, to trap, to fish and swim. He taught him the names of the trees and of all the wild plants of the woods. Danny's first providings on his own to his mother's household were of wild goods, fish and game, nuts and berries that grew by no human effort but furnished themselves to him in response only to his growing intimacy with the countryside. Such providing pleased him and made him proud. Soon he augmented it with wages and produce from the farm work he did with the Burley and the others. The world that Danny was born into during the tobacco harvest of 1932 suited him well. That the nation was poor and hardly noticeable to him, whose people had never been rich except in the things that they continued to be rich in, though they were poor. He loved his half-wooded native country of ridge and hillside and hollow and creek and river bottom, and he loved the horse and mule-powered independent farming of that place and time. When Danny had finished the 8th grade at Port William School, he was growing a crop of his own and was nearly as big as he was going to get, a little taller and a good deal broader than his father. He was a trapper of mink and muskrat, a hunter and fisherman. He farmed for himself or for wages every day that he was out of school, and in the mornings and evenings before and after school. If Burley had not continued to be Kate Helen's main provider, Danny could and would have been. When he began to ride the bus to the high school at Hargrave, the coaches, gathering around him and feeling his arms and shoulders admiringly, asked as if he had been a horse, invited him to go out for basketball. He gave them the smile, direct and a little merry, by which he reserved himself to himself, and said, "I reckon I already got about all I can do." He quit school the day he was 16 and never thought of it again. By then he was growing a bigger crop. He owned a good team of mules, enough tools of his own to do his work, and 2 hounds. When he married Lida 2 years later, he had, except for a farm of his own, everything he had thought of to want. By then the old way of farming was coming to an end, but Danny never gave it up. "Don't you reckon you ought to go ahead and get you a tractor like everybody else?" Burley asked him. And Danny looked up at him from the hoof of the mule he was at the moment shoeing and smiled his merry smile. "I ain't a-going to pay a company," he said, "to go and get what is already here." "Well," Burley said, though he knew far better than the Hargrave basketball coach the meaning of that smile, "tractors don't eat when they ain't working." Then he drove in a nail, bent over the point, and reached for another nail. He did not look up this time when he spoke, and it was the last he would say on the matter. "They don't eat grass when they ain't working." That was as much as Burley had wanted to say. He liked mules better than tractors himself, and had only gone along with the change to accommodate his brother, Jarrett, who, tireless himself, wanted something to work that did not get tired. Burley loved to be in the woods with the hounds at night, and Danny inherited that love early and fully. They hunted sometimes with their neighbors, Arthur and Martin Rowanberry, sometimes with Elton Penn, but as often as not there would have been just the 2 of them, man and little boy, and then man and big boy, and at last 2 men, out together in the dark, mystified woods of the hollows and slopes and bottomlands, hunting sometimes all night, but enacting too their general approval of the weather and the world. Sometimes when the hunting was slow, they would stop in a sheltered place and build a fire. Sometimes, while their fire burned and the stars or the clouds moved slowly over them, they lay down and slept. There was another kind of hunting that Burley did alone. Danny did not know of this until after Kate Helen died, when he and Lida got married and, at Burley's invitation, moved into the old weather-boarded log house on the Coulter home place where Burley had lived alone for 14 years. There were times, though never when he was needed at work, when Burley just disappeared, and Danny and Lida would know where he had gone only because the hounds would disappear at the same time. Little by little, Danny came to understand. In love, Burley had assumed many responsibilities. In love and responsibility, as everyone must, he had acquired his griefs and losses, guilts and sorrows. Sometimes, under the burden of those, he sought the freedom of solitude in the woods. He might be gone for 2 or 3 days or more, living off the land and whatever leftovers of biscuits or cornbread he might be carrying in his pockets, sleeping in barns or in the open by the side of a fire. If the dogs became baffled and gave up or went home, Burley went on, walking slowly hour after hour along the steep rims of the valleys where the trees were old. When he returned, he would be smiling, at ease and quiet, as if his mind just fit within his body.